You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Welcome back. For y'all that have been listening on terrestrial radio for the first 2 hours of this program, I am delighted to return back with the third hour. And for all you joining that weren't listening on terrestrial radio, glad to have you. Tonight we've been talking about my week in review. We've been talking about purpose. We've been talking about the conference I went to and the ability and deductive reasoning that I was able to find by being in the right place at the right time. By being able to help my friend Danny go through his troubles and triumph to get to rehab and to realize that Danny's dealing with more than a drug addiction. He's dealing with some issues and he's dealing with possible early onset dementia. You know, it was very interesting to be able to talk to his family and to help him. And I could have maybe never helped him if I wouldn't have been exactly where I needed to be at the right place at the right time and followed my instinct. Followed my gut instinct. And I realized lately that when people tell you that you should be doing something else, you know what? You need to really listen to yourself and say, is that the truth? Because I think when we're on purpose and we're on point, we don't need someone telling us where we need to go. In reality, we just need to look at them and say, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and move on. Right now, on this third hour of programming, for you special listeners, you're going to hear a little bit about my personal life, about my family, and about a very interesting scenario that just took place. And I'd like to title tonight's show, the last third hour of this show, is Reuniting with Family. The reunion. This began at the very beginning of this year. So let's go back to about February of this year. And I received a friend request on another Facebook that I have. So I have Ashley Burgess, right? And, you know, they have this 5,000 friend limit. And I'd had that for about 2 years at the limit where I couldn't accept anybody, and I just got tired of it. And so I created another one. It was called Ashley Burgess, The Uncensored Perspective. And I'm able to add friends, and I'm able to accept people, and it's nice because I like to. And I like to meet new people, and I love to see old friends and relatives and all kinds of great stuff. And so I get a friend request from a name that looks familiar. And I thought it was interesting. And I went through it and I definitely accepted it. It was a nice lady. She looked a little like older in age. And several pictures of her cats. And I definitely accepted. Because you never know who you're going to learn from. And you never know who you're going to have a really great friendship with. And you're never going to have a great friendship and you're never going to learn from anybody if you don't ever open yourself up to learning. If you don't allow yourself to be vulnerable. I realize that in life, that it's like a lot easier to just let your heart sing. And I think it's interesting. I was actually talking to someone that was at that conference, that Harvard conference. His name is David White. And he did a poetry on heartbroken and how you can have your heart broken. And I don't really think you can ever have your heart broken. I don't think your heart can ever break. I think it can only get bigger. I think we can close off ourselves. I think we can numb ourselves. But your heart's not ever going to break. And I feel that way. And so, you know, I like to open myself up to people and I like to learn from them. And I think that the more that you do this in an altruistic manner and when you're living clean, good things happen. So I get a message on Facebook Messenger a few days later. And her name is Margaret. And she was the lady that I had accepted her friendship. And she said in the message, "My name is Margaret. Are you Ashley Burgess?" And I said, yes, I am. And she goes, "Are you so-and-so's child?" I go, yes, I am. She goes, "I'm your dad's sister." And And the last time that I saw Margaret, and the reason why I kept all this information for the third hour is this is some big time stuff. And the last time I saw Margaret, I was 5 years old. We were at her second wedding, and she was marrying a man named Kenneth. And her first husband was named Kenny, and she was marrying a Kenneth. So she had really made a lot of big changes at this point in time. No pun intended. And she had a son named Kenny and a daughter named Rachel. And I remember, hanging out with her kids, and my parents were big on, I was defined. I was like the defining, poster child of ADHD, attention deficit hyper disorder. And so before my parents had beckoned onto Ritalin, they had just stuck on black coffee. And I kind of wish they would have stuck on black coffee, but anyway, I remember them getting me some black coffee. We were at Margaret's wedding. And so I wasn't ever a crying baby. I was not ever a screaming kid, but they just wanted me to kind of chill out. And so after I drank this really stiff black coffee, I basically fell asleep. But I remember after the wedding at the reception hanging out, and then I remember seeing them like one or two times, like at Christmas. And then after that, my parents and my family moved to Texas. And I remember I was starting first grade, and I hadn't heard my dad talk about Margaret at all. And my dad was like, you know what? Margaret called me last night, and her and Kenneth's marriage isn't working. And she wants a place to stay, and I have allowed her to come stay with us. And I guess the kids were going to stay with Kenneth. I don't really know about that. I was like I was like a young first grader. And so, how much do I know? And so I said, awesome, Dad, when are we going to see her? And he's like, she's going to come in a week. I'm buying a plane ticket. She'll be here. It might have been 2 weeks. So she'll be here. And I said that she's going to sleep in the guest room. And that's fine, because we had a 3-bedroom home. And I'm the only child, so I was like, that's great. Well, I mean, I always liked Margaret a lot. So 2 weeks went by, and I remember my dad saying something about needing to go to the airport, but then we didn't go. And then I remember him being on the phone, and I remember him arguing, and there was an argument. And I remember hearing something was going on. And then I remember asking questions after he got off the phone, and my dad's like, if you could please go to your room. And I went to my room. My dad's like, you go outside too and play, whatever. And I ended up going outside and playing because I didn't know what else to do. And I saw my parents inside the kitchenette from the windows from the outside in the backyard. And I could see them talking. And about 30 minutes later, my mom came outside and said, okay, I'm going to make some dinner. You want to come in and talk? And I said, yeah. And my dad went out, I guess, to drive around. And I clear my head a lot with driving, too. I love driving. That's something I just love to do. I'm a winner. I'm a driver. Things are going to change. I can feel it. And I love driving. And I remember I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, what's going on? My mom goes, yeah, your dad's just dealing with some stuff. Margaret's not coming in. And your dad's kind of angry about stuff. And it's no big deal. And I said, okay. And my mom needed someone to talk to. So she goes, okay, if you can keep it between us, which I know you can. Margaret called and wanted to bring a new boyfriend with her to come stay with us. And she had just met him maybe a few days before. And your dad wasn't going to accept that. It was either Margaret on her own with the kids or not at all. And I asked why, and my mom said that, my dad told her that he has a 6-year-old daughter in the house, and he's not going to have some strange man that he's never met. He could be the nicest person in the world. He might not. I'm not going to have a man that I don't know living in the house with my 6-year-old daughter. And you don't even know him that well. And I got you a plane ticket. And I told you could stay here. And, a little backstory, when my dad's parents died, so my dad's father had a heart attack. And my dad was scared of going to the hospital. He didn't like hospitals. Didn't know what to do about hospitals. It was something that made my dad very uneasy. And everybody told him, John, you really need to get to the hospital to see him. He might not make it. And my dad said, no, he's going to make it. There's no way that he's not going to make it. He's the strongest man I know. There's no way, no how, no way he's not going to make it. And the day later, he gets a call from his mother at the hospital, and his father had had a second heart attack and died. And my dad is still going through, I think he's finally forgiven himself for not being there, but it took a good 20 years. And he finally made it up to the hospital to console his mom. And his parents were very strong, and his mother went on and was a very strong woman and continued with the traditions. His father was always, Santa Claus every year in New Orleans. His father, was in the war and was a Navy diver. He would dive on the bottom of ships to search for bombs and that kind of explosives. My dad would always talk about the bends or not getting scurvy or something like that, and how you had to drink your orange juice to not get scurvy. I'm like, Dad, okay, man. And after the war was over, his dad went and worked in the shipyards in New Orleans. And when we return, we'll be talking more about the shipyards in New Orleans and about my dad and his dad's relationship. Stay tuned, because Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. So you're just tuning in. I was talking about my father, how he lost his father. His father had 2 heart attacks and passed away. My dad was scared of going to hospitals. Scared of going to hospitals. He was overwhelmed about going to hospital. So after my dad's father had the first heart attack, he didn't go to the hospital because he knew that his dad would be fine. His dad is a strong man, and nothing's ever held him back. And so he said, though, the next day, if he's still in the hospital, I'll go. And that next day, his mother calls him to let him know that his father had a second heart attack and died immediately. And so my dad raced to the hospital to console his mother and felt sad, I think, for another 20 years about not being there before his dad passed away. And his mother went on, and she was such a strong, dynamic, vibrant woman, and she went on with all traditions. My dad's father played, Santa Claus every year for the kids, in the area, and they always helped the underprivileged. And, my dad's parents, adopted 3 kids. And my grandmother ran 6 different daycare centers. She owned 6 different daycare centers, and we'd go and check on all of them every day. And when she ended up getting sick years later, I remember, her basically setting up the will, and John was in charge. And after she passed on, my dad gave his sister the daycare centers to run the daycare centers. And I remember my dad felt very good about that, because my dad was a professor in college and knew that this would give her a way to really connect. And I think all of us understand when we're in a position where we're not ready to take that power, we're not ready to deal with things, we're not ready to be in a position of that. And my dad gave that to her at an age that I don't think that she was ready for. And you have to understand people's upbringing, too. She was adopted, and her mother was there was a lot of mental issues there. There was a lot of issues. There was a lot of abandonment issues. So Margaret didn't have it easy. She was adopted by an amazing family, but you can't adopt out the issues that exist. And even when she was going to come live with us, right before that, she had lost all the daycare centers. She had been, her husband had a gambling problem and she had actually signed them over to him, and he had lost them in gambling debts. And it was rough, and my dad was still okay with her coming to live with us. But the last straw was the fact that she had asked my dad that the last minute if she could bring this new boyfriend that my dad had no idea who it was, and he put his foot down and said, "This is not going to happen. I'm not going to have some random man living around my 6-year-old daughter." And that was the last time my dad spoke to his sister until this March. I'm in my mid-30s, let's put it. It's been a long time. And so there I am on Facebook, and I get a friend request from a Margaret, and I accepted the friend request because she looked like a nice older lady with cats and what have you, and she seemed like she was probably very sweet, and so I accepted it. And the next thing you know, I get this instant message. "Are you Ashley Burgess?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "Are you so-and-so's daughter?" And I go, "Yeah." And she goes, "Well, I'm his sister." And right then it all flooded back to me, being at her wedding and having my parents giving me this dark black coffee to try to calm me down so I would sleep during the wedding. And I remember hanging out there and spending time with her and her kids. And I remember the argument on the phone with my dad. And I remember asking questions and being asked to go to my room or going outside. And all those things started flooding into my mind. And she messaged me. She says, "I've been wanting to reconnect with your dad so bad. It's one of the most important things in my entire life, to reconnect with your dad." And I knew that things had not ended on good terms. I knew that my dad has a tendency of holding grudges. And I knew that things hadn't ended on good terms. And so I wanted to really see where she was mentally and emotionally before I made the call. And my dad and I have had issues. There were years where we didn't speak, when my dad told me to, F off and all that good stuff. And we had to work to create a new relationship, one of respect and trust and overall respect, with no age or definition to define us. I was no longer going to be defined as the daughter. And he was no longer going to be defined as dad. From now on out, we were two people who were caring about each other, who loved each other with no defining deal. So my dad likes to hold a little bit of grudges because my dad has some issues as well. I think all of us have certain issues. My dad has some abandonment issues amongst some other things. And so think about it. It's like, because my dad was also adopted. And so you sit there and you think about things, and I didn't know how to bring this up to him. And so me and Margaret would talk via Messenger, once or twice a week. And finally in May, I realized it was definitely the time to bring it up. And I knew it was going to be interesting to see how my dad reacted. So he calls me on the phone. And we were talking, and all of a sudden, I just had to blurt it out. I was like, "So, Dad, have you talked to Margaret?" "Margaret who?" "Margaret, your sister Margaret." "What?" "No." "Why?" Because the other day, she friend requested me on Facebook and really wants to see you." "What?" "Yeah, she really wants to see you." You know what she did, don't you, Ashley? You know what she did, right? Yes, I do. Well, let me tell you what she did. And so he went on and told you the story I just told you about how, he had given her out of the will anything that mattered, was worth value, and how he felt that she had dwindled it away and gotten with the wrong people and made the wrong choices. And then when he gave her an out, she totally screwed him over. And I said, people make mistakes. Granted, that's a lot of mistakes, but people do make mistakes. And I think that she's wanting to apologize But I think in all, she just wants to see her brother. And it would be the right thing to do. And we talked on the phone for a little while, but I could tell that he had to process this, that this wasn't going to be something that was just easy breezy for him. And I'm sure that he went home that night and he talked to his wife, and I think that over time, thinking about it for about a week, he decided, okay. But prior to that, he hadn't called her, and he said he would, and so I had my mother call. And you could tell my mom said that she was happy to hear from her, but she was really wanting to hear from my dad. And so fast forward, and I get a message from her saying that she saw my dad. And how thankful she is, and how much she's just so thankful that she got to see my dad and spend some time with my dad. And then the next thing you know, I see that her Facebook picture changes, and it's my dad and her. And I didn't realize that for a long period of time, she had been using an older picture of herself. She was in a nursing home, in a wheelchair. And I didn't realize that she didn't have a long time. And I knew that it was my mission to connect them. I knew that that was my mission, and I had done it quite well. Being that, after all, they only lived 1 hour away from each other in a totally different state is unbelievable. Being that I was able to connect them off of Facebook again is unbelievable. Being that I was able to talk to my dad in a way that he realized that, yes, indeed, this is something that he needed to do. Again, unbelievable. And my dad called me a few nights later and he said, I saw Margaret and she's not in good health. And I said, what happened? And he goes, well, she's had several surgeries and she's in really bad health and she hasn't really taken care of herself. And he said, and I just don't know, how much time. And I said, well, I think the thing is not really necessarily about focusing on that. I think it's about focusing on the fact that y'all have reconnected and making that reconnection something of value. Even if that reconnection was for one day. You put your differences aside, you put the issues aside, and you made up for it, and you realize that life is more important than things that happened 25, 30 years ago. And I think this is a big lesson for all of us, because things are way more important than letting that time fly. People might have done things to us in our life or have done things at us or around us that we're not happy about. But you know what? Sometimes we have to move on and forgive. And I always believe in forgiving. And I like communication and I like closure. And so when we return, I'm going to be talking more about what recently happened last week and this week. About karma. About purpose. And getting rid of regret. Stay tuned, because Perspectives with me, Ashley Burgess, will be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Tonight I'm talking about reunion, I'm talking about family stuff, I'm talking about karma, and this is hour 3 into an existing 2-hour terrestrial radio show that's already taken place. And this is hour 3. Deeper perspective and a lot of family twist here that some of y'all have already dealt with or are currently dealing with. And if you're just now tuning in, I was talking about the whole concept of reunion. And, I had an aunt of mine that I hadn't talked to or seen since I was 5 reach out on Facebook and ask me if I was who I am, Ashley Burgess, and wanting to hook up with my dad and talk to him. And I was able to put that together. Because I knew that when she came to me and asked me, please, I want to see my brother, I want to talk to my brother, I set that up and I got into action. And after my dad saw her and he was telling me about her health and what have you, I said, well, you know what? It was about you spending time with her. And I said, it's about bygones be bygones and about letting things go and just doing the right thing. And my dad was like, you're right. You're right. And she goes, well, he said, well, you know, she went through this and she had that. She was dating that alcoholic and all this stuff. And I said, I know. Sometimes people choose the wrong decisions all the time. And a lot of that is because of the way we were raised. And, you know, Margaret was raised and brought up in a family where her mother didn't really care that much about Margaret. And so my dad lived on a street, and down the street was where Margaret's mother and her new husband lived. And my dad's mother was talking to them one day and found out that the mother had given her daughter Margaret to her grandparents to live in New York because her new husband didn't want a kid of hers around from another man. So think about that. The kid's old enough to realize that they're getting shipped away. They get shipped up north to live with grandparents. Mother doesn't want anything to do with you because you get in the way of her relationship with her new husband. She needs this guy. That's pretty rough. And so my grandmother decided that she didn't want to have a kid go through that, and she decided that she would adopt Margaret. Honestly, contractually, legally, adopt Margaret and bring her into her home. And so, on the agreement of Margaret's mother, because she didn't care about Margaret, she cared enough to send her kid out of the home so that she could live with this guy. Okay? My grandparents paid money for a flight. You remember, this is a long time ago. I mean, this is before I was born. This was in probably the early 60s. Something like that. Maybe 50s. I don't know. And sent the money up for her to get a flight to go from, I guess they're probably in the 60s, to go from New York to Louisiana. And they picked her up at the airport. I remember my dad, he remembers it like it was yesterday. Because my dad was about to start, I think he was about to start school, like high school or college, maybe high school. Maybe he was in high school. And he said they went to the airport to pick up Margaret. And my dad said that she got off the plane and he said she was covered with dirt. She looked like she hadn't taken a shower or bathed in a long time. Her hair had mats in it. Her clothes were ragged with holes and dirt on it. And all she came was with the clothes on her back. And my dad said, yeah, he goes, we went directly home and, he was talking. He said, my mom told me to go pick this, and that up at the store. And so I left to go to the store and she took Margaret into the bathroom and literally put her in the bathtub and started to scrub her down because she really hadn't bathed in weeks, maybe longer. And she threw the clothes away, and she gave her some clothes to wear of her own, and they went directly to the store to go pick up clothes. And so they bought enough clothes for Margaret, and they went and they tried it on, and my dad said he eventually left because he's a kid, he's in high school, whatever. He's bored of tears, but he goes, I remember seeing her get off the plane, though, and it looked like she had not been taken care of at all. So what I'm saying is that sometimes people make bad decisions in life because they have a low self-esteem, but the clothes don't make the person. And if you've been kind of sold a bill of goods that you're not worthy for so long, you eventually realize that, or you believe that. No matter what my dad's parents did, I don't know if it was good enough as far as psychologically. I think they needed to have some psychological treatment for Margaret. But the worst thing of all was that after they honestly adopted her and legally adopted her, her mother at that point decided to meddle. And so the problem that my dad's mother had is that she was trying to take care of Margaret while Margaret's mother would come down the street and talk Margaret into doing all kinds of stuff that she shouldn't do. And Margaret was never able to just listen to my dad's mother. Instead, she was having to listen to her mother, who was telling her all kinds of deranged things to do. And when I look back at that, it's hard enough for people to figure out their own authentic self. It's got to be really hard when you have a parent that's off kilter, that's really probably borderline personality disorder, coupled with narcissism and coupled with probably depression and mania, but also someone that doesn't really care about you. It wasn't until the child had been legally adopted by other people that the mother started to meddle. Meaning, oh, well, I no longer can just, come by whenever I want to. Now other people care about you. Now I guess I might care about you. But she kept telling her all the wrong things to do. And as long as Margaret's real birth mom was around, Margaret could never thrive. Because she could never get enough gumption within herself to overcome what was being told to her. Instead, she was buying hook, line, and sinker. And so now let's talk real quick about what just happened. 2 days ago, I get a call from my dad, and he lets me know. I said, what happened? What's going on? He's like, I'm good. He's like, I'm glad to hear from you. My dad is a funny man because he's a little bit narcissistic himself. When I called, he goes, oh, my God. I almost ran off the side of the road when I saw your name on my phone. I mean, the first thing you want to say is like, hey, buddy, it's a two-way street. But I was like, okay, funny. I hope you didn't fall off the side. Hope you didn't fall into that ditch. We kind of laughed about it. And I said, what's going on? He's like, I've had a very tough last 10 days. And I said, what's going on? He's like, well, Margaret died. And I go, well, thanks for the heads up. I'm the one. And then I don't think I said that. I think I said it in my head. That's what I said in my head. I went, uh-huh. I'm like, man, I reunited y'all. And then I realized, at first I was kind of angry about that. But then I realized that I think the only place I was supposed to be in the situation was to reunite them. That was my mission. That was my purpose in the situation. And I set up and did as though I did the right thing and I followed my purpose. And that was all that was needed from me. And so that's why I didn't go off on my dad. Well, like, thanks for telling me she died. I mean, it's my freaking aunt, for God's sakes. Who does that? But I realized it wasn't about her death. It was about me conjoining them to meet before she died. And I said, yeah, I didn't think she was in good health. And he goes, well, I didn't know she was he goes, well, she had been through all these surgeries and she was still smoking and she passed on. And I said, my God. I said, so what's going to happen next? What needs to be done? And he goes, well, I've been trying to contact her kids and they will not communicate with me. They will not communicate with me. They don't want anything to do with the burial. They don't want to do anything to do with the death of Margaret. And, her husband and her were divorced. And I said, maybe you should call her ex-husband and see what should happen. We'll see what the next step is. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to call her ex-husband. And he goes, Ashley, I used to teach her ex-husband before it was ever her ex-husband, before it was ever her husband. He taught her ex-husband back in college, freshman year of college. And he goes, he was an idiot kid in college. And I was like, well, he was a freshman, right? He's like, well, yeah. And I was like, and you were like 25 when you were teaching these kids. And my dad kind of laughed. And I said, well, get off the phone and call him and call me back. So when we return, I'm going to be telling you what happened when my dad got on the phone with his sister's ex-husband and what's happening with the children and dealing with regret and how some of these people and some of these characters in this are going to end up regretting their actions more than they ever know. Stay tuned because Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back this time in 2 shakes.
You could be my luck.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
We'll be safe and sound.
Welcome back live to Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Tonight we're talking about families, reunions, closures, death, and regret. My dad and his sister, I reunited my dad and his sister, and I'm delighted that I was able to do my calling in the situation. I was able to do what I needed to do, which was I got the calling I heeded the word. I made the call. I convinced my dad to call her. I convinced my dad to go meet her, and all went as planned. Okay. When I talked to my dad the other day and he told me that she had passed away about 8 days ago, it kind of upset me. It kind of upset me because I was like, dude, that was my aunt. I mean, you couldn't, but then I realized that the only part that I was to play in this was to reunite them. And that's exactly what I did. And so the burial and all this stuff is just subpar because I stepped up to the plate and did exactly what she needed, did exactly what he needed, and made it come together. So Margaret passed away a few days ago, and my dad was reaching out to her 2 kids who apparently do not want anything to do with her death, don't want anything to do with her. And there was no money. Margaret was very ill for a very long time, and she had absolutely no money. Okay? And so my dad was like, I'm going to need to bury her. I'm going to need to figure out how to do this. And when he called me and he was like, this is just, I got to figure out how to do this. I wasn't expecting to bury somebody. And where am I supposed to bury them out? And what am I supposed to do? And how am I going to do this? And I said, why don't you call her ex-husband and see if he has any insight and if he can help in any way. And my dad said, that's a really good idea. So he got on the phone with her ex-husband, and then he called me back, and he told me, he goes, that I used to teach her ex-husband back in college when he was a freshman. I mean, way before they ever met. And I said, I know. And he goes, he was an idiot then. And I was like, most freshmen are idiots. And we kind of laughed about it. He goes, but he was an alcoholic even then. And I said, I know, you told me that. And he goes, well, he still is. And I go, well, most alcoholics are. Most of the time that doesn't change. Sometimes it does. Sometimes people get better. Sometimes people get treatment and they know they have to. But for the most part, most people don't want to get treatment. And so he said, yeah. So I called him, and he told me, though, that Margaret did not want to be buried. She wanted to be cremated. And he said, okay, so what should we do after we cremate her? What should we do with the ashes? And so her ex-husband said, because my dad said, was there ever a fun time or a great place that y'all spent time at that you can remember that she was always really happy at? And he said, yeah. There's this lake that we always hung out at, and we always had a wonderful time at. And Margaret was always laughing and smiling when we were there. And he goes, okay, that's the place we're going to spread the ashes. So my dad said, but right now I'm still trying to get the 2 kids to sign off on it so we can actually get it taken care of, get everything done. The coroner, all this stuff's been taken care of. Everything's been done. And, the nursing home where she was at, the facility, we just need to get it where we can have her remains cremated, but neither one of them will communicate with me. And so my dad called me back. He's like, after we talked on that, and he said, I don't know what to do. And I said, you know what? I know you'll figure it out. And so yesterday we talked, and he said that, you know what? He goes, I finally just gave up. There was nothing I could do. And he goes, I finally was like, if I can't get them to agree, what am I going to do about it? So he finally sent an email to both of them and said, if you don't email me back and you don't sign off on these documents, I'm not going to do anything to help your mother with the burial, to help to do the burial. And by the way, I'm paying for everything. And if you don't want me to pay for everything, and you would rather pay for everything, then don't respond back. He said less than 7 minutes, both of them had signed off on the documentation. Wow. Now, you remember when my dad's father had the heart attack, right? A long time ago, when I was talking about this earlier in the first segment, and my dad didn't make it to the hospital because he didn't want to go to a hospital because he was scared of hospitals. He didn't like hospitals, and he didn't like the way that, just didn't want to be in a hospital. But my dad had loved his dad his whole life, and he had told him all the time he loved him. He wasn't there for the last few days of his life. He wasn't there for the last 3 days of his life, and I think that's eaten my dad up for a long, long, long time. It wasn't until recently, with a little help from me, that he's been able to get over that and to realize that his dad did know that he loved him a lot. I can only imagine how much regret these kids are going to have when they realize that not only did they not see their mother for the last 10 years of her life, They were not there for her death. They did not participate in her funeral. They didn't pay one dime for her mother to be buried. I wonder at what time, besides the fact that they've been living with this guilt their whole life of not stepping up to the plate, and I'm not saying that Margaret's not to blame, don't get me wrong. I'm sure Margaret did a lot of things to hurt those kids. I'm sure several times when those kids really wanted to be with their mom that the mom shunned them. I'm sure there was probably alcohol and drugs involved, and the kids got tired of it. But on the other side, I realized that regret is something I don't want to live with. I don't want to live with regret. I don't want to live with regret, and it's not something I want to do. And so I went to Facebook right before we came on the air, and I went to Margaret's Facebook, and I wrote a comment. I said, God bless you. I love you. Our family loves you. Godspeed. And as I scrolled down on Facebook, I saw her two kids had commented separately about the death of their mother. And remember, I know the true facts. Neither one of them are going to be there for the spreading of the ashes. Neither one of them care. But on Facebook, they make it sound a little different. However, the weirdest thing of all was that their mother had died the same day that the daughter's child had been born. Wow. Wow. That's deep. You couldn't put aside the differences for a little while to see your mom before she died. Even if it was for one day, I think it would go a long way to soothe any sort of open wounds. It would go a long way to help the heart deal with what's going to be a very tough, solo, painful process that both of these children are going to deal with. And the whole fact that every time the child turns another age and another year older, they're going to remember that that was the day that their mother died, and they had not seen her in a very long time. What I'm saying to you tonight is this. If anybody's going through issues with your family, no matter how messed up it was, realize they're still your family. Understand that you don't have to forget what they did. Understand that you don't have to even necessarily maybe forgive every wound, but I think that in order for you to get better in life, you have to forgive. You don't have to forget, but you have to forgive. It's better if you forget, but you just don't want to fall into the same cycle, because most of the time when people forget, they just do it all over again. But it's better to not have it at the forefront of the mind. The next thing, too, is that when things like this happen and bad things happen and water was under the bridge and it's hard to deal with, you have to look at it in the long haul and say, what's going to actually do more harm than good? More harm than good is the fact that I didn't get to see my mom before she died. I didn't get to spend time with her. I didn't get to tell her I love her. I didn't get to at least say, you know what, I'm not happy with a lot of things that you did, but yet I care about you as a human being. I mean, think about not even attending the funeral of your parent. And I stress the fact that we got to let things go because life is too short. And why would you want to be carrying all this regret when you don't have to? You don't have to. And on the bright side, my father, because of the connection and my dad following through and doing what I suggested, has no regret. He stepped up to the plate, and even though Margaret had done some things to my dad and to the family that he was not happy about, and they hadn't spoken in 25 years, my dad stepped up to the plate, and he will live with no regret. My dad is having her cremated and will help he will spread her ashes, and he will be the one that can look at all this with no regret and only tears of joy that she is moving on to her next level in a spiritual realm. My dad's karma has been restored when it comes to this. And he's done the right thing. And we see how in both of these instances, one person took the step forward and two people took the step back. And in life, we all have the chance to do what's right. And we all have the chance to step up to the plate, but we just have to get out of our own minds, get out of our own ways sometimes. And when it takes us putting the past behind us and letting things go, sometimes we have to do that. And in order, when we do that, we feel so much better. And maybe the person did screw up our lives a lot, but you know what? You don't want them to keep screwing up your life from the grave. Because when we don't deal with something, we let that happen because that's on our mind. It's heavy on our heart. It's heavy on everything that we do. And life is too short. And life has some real meaning. And from this story alone, I think that you can catch it. Like, the bets in Vegas, the odds in Vegas, how would you ever have your child the same day that the mother that you haven't spoken to dies? What is that saying to you? What does that mean? And to me, the meaning of that was you needed to be there. And so what I say tonight is live with no regret. If there is any regret that you have that you can take care of right now, get on that phone. Get on the phone, call them up, stop by their house. Do what needs to be done. If you have to begin with an email, begin with an email. If you have to begin with a letter, begin with a letter. Whatever you need to do to start making this regret go away, to start erasing that and to create some sort of love or at least a communication or some closure, do it now. Do it now so that, guess what, you can be like my dad. Do it now so that you're the one, that your karma's restored, that you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, I did everything I could. Do it now. And for all you who might be the people that put others together like I was in this situation, when somebody asks you to do something, do it. Set it up. Make it happen, because guess what, I feel very good about my part that I played to make sure that Margaret got to see her brother before she died. For more shows, check out here on Spreaker. Check out AshleyBurgessNetwork.com. For any of my blogs and other shows or anything else, there's about 265 and change on AshleyBurgess.com, AshleyBurgess.com. If you have any questions or thoughts, go on and go to AshleyBurgess.com. Click on that contact page on AshleyBurgess.com. Click on the contact page. Click on that. Fill out the form. Send it to me, and I will directly respond to your email as soon as I receive that. I look forward to hearing some ideas for shows that you want me to talk about, and I look forward to hearing from you. Stay tuned, because you know what? Perspectives, always more answers, less questions. And Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back next time. And I'll be back, when will I be back? When will I be back? I'll be back, in 3 shakes.